Okay, Assalamu alaikum everyone. Welcome to the Peaceful Parenting for Raising Strong Muslims webinar done by Dr. Denise Berte. About Peaceful Families Project. Peaceful Families Project is a national nonprofit 501c3. It focuses on education and training for leaders, community members, and service providers, specifically in the areas of domestic violence awareness, healthy relationships such as marital bliss, and cultural competency. We also work on resource development, research, and technical assistance in these departments. Now for Dr. Denise Berte.
Assalamu alaikum, good evening for those of us at least on the East Coast. I'm Dr. Denise Berte. I am a licensed clinical psychologist in Pennsylvania, Delaware, and the state of Palestine. And I am going to talk to you a little bit about parenting. My experience has been really multicultural, so my examples and some of my stories will be from all around the world. I have raised children in Latin America, West Africa, and then also Palestine and here in the United States. So be aware, I will be aware of that, and you be aware of that as we kind of go through. Aside from being a clinician, I am a professor of clinical psychology and also a mom of 8 lovely, wonderful, but very real children. So hopefully that will give some flavor to our presentation today as well. So we're going to talk about peaceful parenting for raising strong Muslims as really the basis. The idea being that our children are our own, but we are also raising a generation of Muslims to go out in the world and to be sort of that light of Islam as they go, as their lives emerge. So we want to remember that as we're parenting. We're not just parenting for us and for our children and for our family, we're really parenting for the world, especially in these days. And we'll talk a little bit about that. So when we start out, I want to start out talking about you and you as a child, because there is no better expert on how to be a parent than to remember who you were as a child, right? So I want you to go back and you guys can jot some notes. The beautiful thing about Zoom is I don't have to wear heels, I don't have to park, I don't have to drive, but I also don't get to see your lovely faces and we don't get to have the normal kind of discussion that we would have in a workshop. But I do want to engage you in that way. So I want you to write down notes, however you need to do, to be able to think about who you were as a child. So what was your nickname as a child? What did people call you? What were you best known for? Were you the mischievous one? Were you the studious one? Were you the responsible one? What was the rule that you most frequently broke or just didn't understand why it was there as a kid? What hidden strengths did you have as a child that either nobody figured out or you didn't figure out until much later in your life? Who was the adult or older, meaning could be an adolescent, hero that understood in your life, that understood you the best, or who was your best advocate? And I want you to think about that little you as we go through these slides and talk about us as adults and us as parents and us as mentors to the children that we have entrusted to us today, because those connections are going to be very important. So before we talk about children and who they are, we really need to take a step back and talk about what children are not. And throughout history, and certainly within our own families and traditions, we have a lot of ideas about what children should be. And I want to make sure that we take out some of those things that put us in a path of unrealistic expectations or unaffirming places for child and adult relationships. First of all, children are not small adults. they shouldn't look like us, dress like us, behave like us, sit still for 8 hours in front of a computer in a day. Children are not like adults. They are biologically, cognitively, emotionally, and socially, spiritually, in every way, children are unique. They are in a developmental process that is very distinct from what adulthood should look like. Children are also not like each other. A lot of times, as parents and as older family members, we can't help but compare children. Well, your cousin is doing this. Your sister did this at age 5. Why are you different? Why are you not following the path that we expect you to follow? And what we need to remember always is that children are very unique. They are products of their biology. They are products of their environment. And even two children in the same family do not have the same background. So we need to really keep in mind that when we look at children, we can't expect them to be doing things or to be like each other. The next one is very important, and it's a trap we all kind of fall into, which is children are not a representation of our goodness of a parent, our beauty, our sports talent, our music talent, our religiosity. Children are not a representative of us. Children are unique beings that have been entrusted to us by our wonderful God to guide and to show and to care for, but they are not our representatives in the world. And I know culturally, that's a difficult one because a lot of us were told that that is exactly what we are. We are a representation of our mom, our dad, our family name, our family reputation, our religion, our race, our culture, our nation. But in reality, that's a lot of pressure for any small person. And as parents, we need to step back and say, well, maybe we need to be our best representatives and let our kids be who they are. Children are not unidimensional. So we talked about who you were as a kid. Were you the serious one? Were you the mischievous one? Were you the sports one? We tend to really put kids in a category that may sort of cut off their possibilities in other ways, which is to say, you can be the studious one and also be the funny one. You can be the sporty one, but also be the sensitive one. So children are not one set of characteristics. In this way, they are like us in that they have many different characteristics. They have many different likes and dislikes and talents and strengths and weaknesses. So we can't put them into one category. Children are not their actions, which is to say, if you are naughty, if you talk back, if you pray beautifully, you are also not that thing. That thing is one thing that you do, but it is not the character of who you are, just like any of us. If I burn the rice for dinner, that doesn't mean that I am a rice burning bad cook kind of person. It just means that one day, for whatever reason, that's what happened. So we need to be careful with that with kids as we try to kind of characterize and understand who they are in the world. Children are also not a finished product. To be honest, none of us are finished products. We are all a organic being in process that is changing. But for children especially, they are in the midst of, and we're going to talk about in all of the ways that they are changing. So their bodies are changing, their internal chemicals are changing, their ability and structures of cognition are changing, their ability to manage emotions are changing, their social relationships are changing. In fact, developmental psychology, there are entire libraries full of books and information about how children change over the lifespan, especially from 0 to 5, and then from 5 to 12, and then adolescence. So we don't expect when we look at them, and I know that's hard as parents because we look at them and they do something and we're like, oh, that means they're going to be a terrible, horrible person, or that means that, you know, they've gone to the other side, when really they are just a little chemical reaction on its way to being something else. For us as parents, we follow not only what the world and science and psychology tell us about children, but we also have the base of what does Islam tell us about our own children. So one of the most beautiful things that Islam does is to correct something that was earlier in Christianity, which is the idea of original sin. That children are born with the sin of their parents, the sin of their communities, all of that inside of them. And one of the things that they need to do is to work through that. In Islam, we know that children are born pure of heart, and they do not carry the sin of any generation before them. They are born beautiful and perfect creatures just the way that they are. We know in Islam that children, our job is for children to be cared for, to be taught, and to be guided, inshallah, by their parents, and then if orphaned, by the ummah, by us in an entirety. We know that children under Islam have rights equally, not to be determined by gender, by race, or by family. And we know, and it's repeated over and over again in both the Quran and Hadith, that children are to be loved and protected. Now, I do want to be careful here because there is, as you know, a very sometimes distinct understanding of Islam and then of what our cultures, who may be Islamic in nature, have interpreted that to be or have acted that to be in the world. So we need to go back to, what does the Quran say? What does our Prophet, peace be upon him, what does he show an example in his life? So what is it that our Prophet has said? And unfortunately, I'm going to have a difficult time with this because part of my slide is covered by me. So whoever is not kind to the young and to the old and does not respect the elders is not part of my tribe, right? Honor your children and educate them well. Your children have the right in receiving equal from you as you have the right that they should respect, equal respect to you as you have to them. Now, a lot of these sayings we've heard part of, right? Our children have to respect us, our children, and we forget that there was a second side to those verses. What is it that we have in Hadith? What is it that we have from the example of our Prophet, peace be upon him, to explain to us what should we do with children? And there's some beautiful, beautiful stories. There's a story about our Prophet talking to a child who is a friend of one of his close companions, and knowing the child well enough to know about his little bird and what happened with that, and really taking the time to talk through that with the child. We know that there was a time when a Bedouin man came to the Prophet and said, you hug your children, you're affectionate with your children, but that's not part of our culture, right? That's basically what he's saying. That's not who we are. And what the Prophet, peace be upon him, stated was that, what can I do for you when mercy has been removed from your heart? That really caring and being affectionate and loving with children is part of who we are as Muslims. It's not aside from, it's not because we're nice people, it is part of our calling as Muslims. We know that we are called by example to be fair, to be patient, to give equal treatment for girls and for boys, and to be forgiving in all of our relationships, but certainly in our relationship with children. So let's talk about how children are a work in process. children's major systems, that means organs, chemicals, brain functioning, all of the above, are not fully developed until age 18. And some people will tell you they are not fully developed until age 24, which means that children cannot, even in the best situation, even the smartest kid with the best parent, cannot learn some skills and some concepts until their biological systems are prepared. And this includes the difference between right and wrong. It includes the ability to manage emotions. It includes sharing and being friendly. All of the things that kind of make us crazy about kids sometimes are the product of just that biological growth and development. This includes physical growth and strength, the need for the ability to be able to carry something without dropping it, to feed themselves, to how tall they are, the ability to withstand pain and irritation and annoyance. All of that is about nerve endings and biological development, which means when we are saying, well, why isn't he eating correctly? Or why does he drop the milk all the time? That really has to do with hand-eye coordination, strength of muscles, all of those kinds of things. So it is not something that a child necessarily can control in any way. Their thoughts and understanding, which includes academics, their understanding of what's real and what's not real, the idea of goodness or justice or any of those kinds of things really are not available to children. That is not, so even if they can do it, I know one of the arguments I have, or arguments, one of the educated moments I have with parents when I'm working internationally is the idea that children should learn how to read before they go to kindergarten. They should be writing, especially in Arabic. And to be honest, children are not able to either have the hand-eye coordination to manage pencils and things like that, or have the what's called object permanence, which means this is a figure and this is what it representation, until much later, until ages 6 to 10. So when we're trying to push our kids to be, you know, a jump ahead of everybody else, and, you know, all of these reading programs that, you know, by age 4 they can be reading, it's just not physiological and cognitively possible for them to do those kinds of things. So if that's our expectation, we're always going to be frustrated with that child. The same with the ideas of good and bad, right? To try to talk to a child about what you did was very bad. They're not going to understand that. Now, children do understand that if somebody yells at you for something, or you lose a privilege because of something, they will avoid doing it. But a deep understanding that this is right and this is wrong actually is not developmentally appropriate until the age of 12. So all of the time that we spend trying to sort of moralize with young children really is not only an exercise in frustration, but there is no way that children can understand those kinds of things. So when they look at us with those kind of blank faces, and that makes us crazy, right? What do you mean you don't understand? They're not kidding. They really can't. They don't have the global and abstract cognitive ability to understand these kind of big, you know, fairness, that, you know, those kinds of things really do not fit into what their brains can comprehend. Emotion and emotional regulation. So the idea of being able to control anger, of being able to withstand frustration, of being silly. I remember being a kid, getting in trouble, being sent to bed for laughing too much, for being too joyful. And even as a child, I didn't understand that. It was like, no, but I don't understand. We're just being happy. Just because it's something that, you know, can, especially parents who are tired and or are sort of over stressed, that you know, continual silliness of kids can even be, you know, can provoke anger or frustration. Children cannot manage emotions before then. And then actually what we see is so, you know, 3 to 5, they have a hard time. Then maybe 5 to 12, they kind of can manage it. And then 12 or 13, we hit hormones, and then again those emotions kind of get a little bit of unmanageable. Now, again, if our idea is that children should be stoic, children should understand, children shouldn't, laugh when they're nervous, children shouldn't be silly in the mosque, those kinds of things, again, we're going to be frustrated because we're asking children to do things that they really physiologically, that they are not developmentally able to do. Social relationships, so siblings, peers, authority, how they treat grandparents, how they treat parents, all of those kinds of things. Now, again, those kinds of things are trained over time, so eventually they learn. But they are not born with this innate understanding of, this is someone's bigger than me, I need to respect them, this is my sister, I need to love her all the time. All of those kinds of things come with experience over time. So we can't expect a very young child, a 3-year-old, to know, this is my cousin, so I should be happy about sharing my toys, for example. It's like, no, those are my things. And we'll talk about some ways to manage those behaviors. But the expectation that a child will understand what sharing is, or that this is a family member versus a non-family member, really takes learning over time. Understanding of religious and religious ritual, again, it takes really, for the abstract idea of God, really we're talking 13, 14, and 15. So while children younger than that can follow rituals, they can fast, they can pray, they can read the Quran, but really deep understanding that really is a reflection of who they are, is not possible to happen until really 13, 14, 15 years old. And it comes with some amount of struggle, because we are talking about things that are so big, and as it should, because we as adults need to question, need to really deeply understand what our beliefs mean. Children will follow, they will repeat, they will learn ritual, and that's beautiful, that should be done, but a real deep understanding of that, of what that means, of what mercy means, of what compassion is, of what forgiveness is, really is not cognitively possible, spiritually possible, until early to late adolescence. If we try to force children to produce behaviors and actions, thoughts or beliefs before they can, not only are we going to be frustrated, but our relationships with children are going to be conflictual. And as much as they love us, and as much as they want to please us, they are going to feel like they can never do that enough, that they can never be good enough. And many of us know that feeling with parents, right? When parents are asking you at age 5 to sit quietly during, a 2-hour reading of the Quran, when it's just not possible. So no matter how hard we try and whatever good intentions we have and how much we love that parent and want to do that, we just really physiologically can't. Now, on top of being biological, developmental, organic beings, organic creatures, children are also a product of their environment. And I think as parents, we don't always like this piece, or as adults around children, because that means that children are a reflection not of what we want to present our world to be, but what our world really is. And we'll talk about how that is, and that also being sort of a sensitive piece with parents when children present to the world something that we know exists in our house or in our family, but that we would rather kind of cover up. So first of all, I need you to know that children listen to less than 10% of what we say. So if some of you who are old enough to remember the Charlie Brown cartoons, where whenever the teacher would talk, you would hear wah, 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 wah. That's what children hear when we speak. They catch a little of the emotion. As they get older, they can pay attention to some of their words, but to be honest, they don't attend to what we say. And for some of us, even more so. If we have a tendency to talk and talk and talk and not follow through, then it's not even important to them. However, what's even more scary is that they watch everything that we do. Everything. even the things we don't want them to pick up on, they are learning creatures. So we are teaching 100% of the time, and it's almost never what we're trying to teach. It's always what they're actually seeing, right? So if we hear or we see parents smoking and telling their children, but you should never smoke. Or one of the ones, and we'll talk a little bit later about physical violence, but you know, when we have an older child who hits their little brother and a parent who's saying, big people should never hit people smaller than them. And you're going like, okay, but you're saying one thing, but you're really doing the opposite because you're a bigger person than me. So we have to remember that children are always watching what we do. And that's really where we need to make our difference, not in what we tell children, but in what we model for our children. So to be effective, parents must mirror what we want our children to do. And this includes everything. So it certainly includes respect of others. So if we want children who are respectful to authority, then we need to be respectful to authority. And that means to our parents, that means within our households, that means if we get pulled over by a police officer because we did something not appropriate, we have to be that model and that example of how we treat authority and respect in everything that we do, because those little eyes are watching. Work ethic and frustration management. This is really important. And we're going to talk a little bit later about tolerance. One of the things that our children learn from us is what important work looks like. And this is difficult because the society that we live in, to be honest, today in the United States, in the Western world, a lot of times it is not effort that is rewarded. You know, we see sports figures who we don't see them practicing all the time, but we see the very big paychecks that they bring home. Or people on YouTube. My son is always telling me that people can get rich on YouTube without any study, without any difficulty. At the same time, we see people who work really hard, people working in the fields, people cooking our food who don't get very much reward at all. So the idea that we should put effort into our work is one that we really need to present to our children and explain to them. And a lot of times we'll say, oh, well, you know, my children they don't know what I do at the office, or they don't see me work at home. It's important for children to see us work. It's important for children to understand that when you work at something, you make it excellent and you make it beautiful, and that takes effort, and that it's not always easy. We need to show them, I made a mistake and I erased my presentation in the computer, and now what am I going to do? Without throwing the computer, without cursing at the computer, without, you know, and really let them know this is not easy. This is not a good feeling. But to mimic what we want them to do when they make a mistake on their homework or when they have a difficulty, to be said, okay, let me say, you know, inshallah, and let me start again, and to really be the person we want them to be, because we can't ask them to be anything that we have not taught them to be. Academic pursuits, again, a lot of times it's very funny. We want our children to be perfect at school, but they never see us study. They never see us maybe take time to read or take time to learn something that is difficult. Because we have the idea that as adults, well, we're done with that. We don't need to do that anymore. But we have to remember that our children need to see that, and they need to see that not only from us, but we need to make a big deal about, you know, graduation and study, and not always the outcome. And I'm going to talk about this more than once. Not only rewarding the outcome, like yay, graduation day, but wow, look how hard you studied. Look how much time you spent. Look how much time, look at your cousin and she just finished reading the Quran and that took a really long time. And we're really proud of her, not for finishing, but for putting attention every single day that she had to do to read it. The same with the maintenance of religious or ritual kinds of things. If our children don't see us pray 5 times a day, we cannot sell them on the idea of praying 5 times a day. If our children do not see us fast, we cannot ask them to do the same. The way that we teach has to be through our actions, has to be through what we do. Now there is, and I know sometimes this feels like a cultural issue, right? So when we talk, and I spend a lot of my time not in the United States, when we talk to international communities about children's human rights, sometimes they're little they're they get goosebumps. They're not so excited about this idea. It's like, well, children are ours. They're our property. They're our legacy. They have to listen. And there's some truth to that, and we can kind of have a conversation about that. But there are also some issues that not only has the Western world and the UN and those kinds of places stated, but even within the Quran, that we talk about children have rights. They have actual rights because they are believers. They are part of our community. Those rights include safety. And we'll talk about what safety really looks like. That means that nobody is supposed to hurt you. Now, discipline is not hurting you. Discipline in the best sense, and we'll talk about what discipline looks like, is educating you to do better. But children should feel safe. And we know that in many of our communities, internationally, that doesn't happen, not because of the fault of parents, but because of the fault of policies and governments and things like that. But within our power, our job is to make sure that children are safe, that children have housing, which means not only shelter, but privacy. And again, I know in some households that's impossible. We have, 3 girls in that room, 3 boys in that room, babies in that room, and that's okay. But everybody should have a moment of the day where they can be alone somewhere, where they can have a moment to sort of sort out their own thoughts. And especially, we can be much more sympathetic about that these days, that we have been sort of confined to our own homes during quarantine, and how as parents, that has felt like, I just need 5, I'm going to go sit in the car just by myself, just because I need that 5 minutes of compression time. Kids also have that need. Food and clean water, obviously, medical care, education, equally, everyone, girls, boys, older, younger, abled and other abled. And we'll talk about, I know I've had conversations, very difficult conversations with parents who really could not afford school, and said, well, but so, and this is in a place where education is not free. Well, the extra tutoring for a child with a learning disability, or with an intellectual deficit, or those kinds of things, that every child has the right to as much support as that we can give, in terms of making them to be the best them that they could be. And that might not be a doctor or an engineer, but that they get the education to the level that they can get. Freedom from excessive punishment or restriction, and freedom from excessive control. And those are the things that sometimes we have difficulties with managing. And we'll talk about that as we go along. Now, this idea that our children are a new generation is not a new idea. So even back, way back in the day of our prophets, this was a piece of advice. Do not raise your children as your parents raised you. They were born for a different time. And I want you to really think about that when we talk about our little guys who have just lived through a pandemic that is not, and that none of us have seen in 100 years, who have been, their education has been stopped. They have been told to wear masks. They have been told that their friends may carry germs, that they should not go out and play, and then we had a set of civil unrest, which is unlike most times in the United States. For some communities, they have had, here in Pennsylvania, we had tornadoes. Our children have been asked to absorb a lot. in the past 3 months. And our children also are different. They have grown up with screens, so their little fingers know how to do stuff that we never would have thought about doing before. They are growing up in a world that is much quicker, that in some ways is much closer internationally than it is before. But in any case, our children, even our children, and we're not that old, even our children are growing up in a very different world than we grew up in. So we want to make sure that we are educating them to be strong, good people and Muslims for this world, not the world that we came from. Now I know that within Islam, and I use these verses with my children all the time too. What do? Who do we respect? We respect mother, 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 then father. Having respect for parents is very important for us. And as such, sometimes it's difficult for us to talk about some of the things that maybe our parents who were doing, and absolutely, just the way that we do, were doing absolutely the best that they could, may not have had parenting techniques that were the most encouraging, enriching, and may even have left scars on the adult people that we are. And if we're going to look at our parenting, because again, no matter what our parents told us or our professors told us or what we saw on TV, most of us parent, at least in some way, the way that we were parented. So when we look at our parenting skills, we do need to look at the way that we were parented and to take some lessons from that without disrespecting our parents or their generation or their beliefs or their methodologies, but looking at them as techniques that may or may not, to be honest, there's some things that work and some things that don't, that may or may not work for either us, that might have left some damage to us, or certainly that might not work for our kids who really are quite different in terms of the world that they live in. So I want you to again think back to you, your little you. What were the ways that adults tried to teach you important lessons? Did they do a lot of talking? Did they do a lot of punishing? Did they do a lot of yelling? Did they do a lot of, throwing up their hands and sending you to grandma's house? All of our families were different, and having lived on 5 different continents, I can tell you between cultures, there are very different ways of dealing with things, right? None of them right, none of them wrong, just different. So think back in your own mind, what were the ways that adults tried to teach you important lessons? Now I want you to think about what were the methods that really worked best. What taught you? Now, not what made you afraid not to do something, because that's a different issue, or what made you, very anxious and disciplined, but what really taught you the lessons that they were trying to teach you. What types of adults did you respect more as a child? Not now looking back and saying, my parents worked really hard, they were immigrants, they came, they suffered. But as a child, who were the folks that you respected? Who were the folks that you listened to? Who were the folks that you felt comfortable with as a kid? Now, when you were punished, how were you punished when you did do things that were not okay? And that's perfectly normal, because as kids, again, they are developmental experiments. Our job is to guide them. If they didn't need guidance, they wouldn't need parents, right? They, pop out perfectly grown. They're given parents because it is our job to guide and teach. So when you did do things that were not correct, how were you punished? What did that look like? Was it humiliating? Was it boring? Was it, was there a lot of religiosity around it? Those kinds of things. Now, and this gets a little bit harder. How did that really make you feel at that time? Remember, that little you. Not how you rationalize it as an adult, but how did it make you feel as a little guy? And then what are the things, because we all have this list, you don't have to tell your mom or your dad, what are the things that you promised you would never do to your child? And I won't make you say whether or not you've done them since. Almost all of us have, right? So what were those things that felt to you as an adolescent, as a young adult, so heinous, so causing so much misunderstanding and so much lack of affirmation of who you were, that you swore, I will never do this. Okay, because those kinds of experiences are also going to be able to teach us about how we are perceived and how we are understood by our children. Now, I do want to talk a little bit about physical punishment and intimidation. And I worked, for 6 years doing parenting in Palestine, where parents are sometimes very tough. And I remember having a dad who was very tough, was what I would consider physically abusive to his child. And he came in one day and told me, you Western stupid woman are not going to tell me I cannot beat my child. I brought him into this world. It is my right to beat him, and I will beat him as much as I can. And I said, absolutely. And to be honest, in that country, it is not against the law to hit your children, to use physical discipline. I don't, absolutely, you're within your right. But is it working? Like, no, the kid hates me and he's terrible and his behavior doesn't change. And I'm really afraid I'm going to hurt him seriously because every time I have to up the level and it just doesn't seem to work. And that's what I sold him on. And that's what I will talk about today. A lot of our traditional folks will say we have the right to physically discipline our children. They are our children, and we want them to grow in a certain way. And I am, those folks, and if some of them are in the audience, I will not argue with you about that. You have the God-given right. I'm not that Western. On the other hand, as a psychologist, as a physiologist, as somebody who understands the way that bodies work, my difficulty with physical punishment is it just doesn't work. And in fact, it's set up for failure. And I'm going to explain to you why. Okay. So any action that causes a child, any of us, to fear will initiate what we call a central nervous system activation. So I want to imagine that you get pulled over by a police officer, or you're in a grocery store and somebody starts coughing, right? So what are the things that happen to your body? Almost immediately, your heart starts racing, right? You can feel it inside of your body. Your breathing changes. It gets very shallow. Your hands get sticky. They get sweaty. Now, this is a system called fight or flight. And alhamdulillah, this is a beautiful system. This is a necessary system that was created inside of us that helps us to manage emergencies. And those are life-threatening events that we need to either fight, flight, run, freeze, pretend we're not there, or friend, which means get a group of people and hide inside of them, right? It's a beautiful system and it works perfectly because it gives us quick energy. One of the things that it does at the same time is to turn off the frontal lobe of our brain, which is the place where we speak, we are logical, we make decisions, because alhamdulillah, our creator knew that this was an emergency, is not a time to think, right? So if a big bear comes, it is not my job to be like, wow, what kind of bear is that? I wonder what his zoological taxonomy is. No, that's the time to just run, to just protect yourself. So we are actually made that when that system gets turned on, our brain, our thinking part of our brain, gets turned off, because it is our job to just get out of there and ask questions later. Now, and it makes us hard. And some of you know, that's why when we get pulled over, we're like, or when we're very nervous at a test, we can't think straight, right? Because that part of our brain really has turned off. Now, I want you to imagine a little guy, right? A 5-year-old, a 6-year-old, even those little, 7 and 8-year-olds who has a big parent screaming at the top of their lungs at them and ready to smack them. Now, you as the parent, at that moment, you're trying to scare them because that's the idea. How could you do this? You ran in the middle of the street. I thought you were going to die. Unfortunately, what happens physiologically, physically to that kid is that system turns on, which means their heart rate starts, their breathing gets shallow, the tears come to their eyes, they're ready to fight or to run. They're not able to learn in that moment, though. So if my job is teaching you not to run in the street or not to hit your baby sister or not to, play with a dog you don't know, in that moment with my reaction, I can't teach you because you are biologically not able to learn. So one of the things that we need to know is if we're really concerned about educating at that moment and not scaring them enough to not do something, we can't do it when that system is activated and that part of the brain is turned off. So physical punishment and intimidation, what it's good for biologically is science speaking. What it's good for is stopping behavior immediately. Like don't touch the hot, startling somebody. And we know that, right? Don't touch the hot stove. Don't run into the street. Don't hit the little teeny tiny baby because you could hurt them. And that moment is good for cessation, for stopping something in that exact moment. But it's not good for teaching why you shouldn't do that. So what kids learn is I can't do that in front of a grown-up because they will stop me. That they will stop that behavior by the yelling, by hitting, whatever. But I'll never understand why. As Muslims, as parents, we want our kids to understand why. Because why creates behavior change over time. We don't want them to just stop for anybody because what if that person is not a good person? What if that person is somebody we don't want them to listen to in the community, right? Somebody who wants to take advantage of them or to scare them. We want them to understand the whys. And if we want that, then we need to discipline, we need to teach in a different way. We also know that we want children to emulate us, right? And we just talked about how children watch what we do, not what we say. So if we're saying don't hit people, but we're hitting, or we're saying respect people, but we're screaming obscenities at them, we're screaming vulgar words at them, or, cursing them and telling them they're, like their grandfather's worst nightmare and all of those kinds of things that come out of our mouths in those moments. And usually because we're afraid of what our children might do or that they might be in danger. Children are going to follow that. That's what they're going to do in the world. The other thing is they are going to, as they get older, unfortunately, those smart kids get older and they start thinking and they're like, this parent is a little scary. And they're telling me to do one thing, but they're doing something different. And that's when they get, 11, 12, and they start watching you and start telling you what you're doing. And by that point, it's almost too late because you've already shown them, you've taught them who you are and the way that you manage stress and the way that you manage discipline. The other thing is, of course, is that what we know from scientific studies, about 90% of parents who use extreme physical violence in discipline saw that or were the victims of that in their homes. So that's exactly what we thought would happen, right? Children don't listen to what we say, they watch what we do. And in the end of the day, is this how we want our kids to feel? Do we want them to feel that they're less than, that they're stupid, that they're ugly, that they're bad? Because that is something that will follow with them. And that will make it much more easy for somebody in the outside world to convince them of the same thing, to manipulate them, and in the end of the day, to abuse them in either as children or as adults. So, how do we build something else? Given that a lot of us also didn't have a lot of models that were not that, right? That we were brought in that traditional way, and everybody will tell you, well, I was brought up that way, it was fine. We survived, and we've gotten different kinds of skills about that. Whether or not it was fine is a different question. But in any case, our children are going to face things that we can't even imagine facing, right? Cyberbullying, that's something I thought about as a kid. How to present yourself on social media, how to manage racism in the streets with police who may or may not be on your side, all of those kinds of things. So we need to build different skill set in our kids. So one is we want kids that believe in themselves. We want kids who can defend themselves, who know what's right or wrong, not because they're going to depend their belief on somebody else, right? So how do we do that? We do that through encouragement, right? Not by, you did this wrong, you did that wrong, but really, wow, look how strong you are. Look how smart you are. Look at the way that you questioned that. Experiencing new things, right? So the idea that we want them to do courageous things. We want them not to be afraid of the world. We want them to have belief that they can climb a mountain, that they can swim in the sea, that they can, even though as parents we might get very nervous about that, we want them to have that faith in themselves. We want them to know their limits on their own, like, I don't want to cross over this boundary with an adult or with an authority figure. And we want them to feel joy. We want them to be fully alive. We want them to believe in our families, right? And how do we believe in families? And again, I think it's interesting during this time of quarantine, because I've noticed I have small kids to big kids, and a lot of my big kids are coming home, because now our home is the place where is the restaurant, and is the daycare, and is the park, and is also where you get your hair cut by one of your brothers or sisters, like this sort of more old school. A lot of times we very much independentized in here in the United States, where we didn't need our family for any of those things. And one thing that the virus has done is kind of send us back to our families. But how do we build those positive families? How do we build loyalty and affection and obligation within our families? And I do think there's this idea that we can do it like this. Well, this is your sister and you take care of her. This is your brother, but it doesn't. A lot of times under obligation, what we find is when the parents' wagging finger is not there, those positive relationships aren't building. So how do we want to build loyal, positive, integrative families that really can protect each other in the time of a pandemic, in the time of an outside scary kind of thing happen. We also want our kids to believe in Islam, right? We don't want them to throw up their hands to religion and give up our values and our culture, but our religious beliefs. And the way that we have to do that is really to help them understand religion. Because again, these are not kids that were born in the 1930s who are just going to accept everything that they see. They have conspiracy theories, they have the internet, they have TV, they have a whole outside world that really we never had at that age. And because of that, in some ways it's beautiful. They get to meet and learn all sorts of things. But that means we need to teach what it is to be Muslim in a different way. And it's not because I said so. As we know, in religion, there is no compulsion. We need to teach in a way that they can answer the questions why. So when somebody else asks them in that outside world that we're not always a part of, so why do you fast? Why do you wear hijab? Why is it important to pray? That they have those answers on their own, not because my parents told me to, because my parents told me to will only last as long as their parents are on top of them. Now, aside from belief in Islam, we also want them to believe in what are those base global abstract things that we believe in as Muslims: justice, mercy, compassion, servitude. And the way that we do that is really to show them those examples in the world, both historically, both within our prophets and our own writings, but also within the world. That's a very different way of teaching than the way that we were taught, because we need Muslims who are stronger in a different way than even we were called to be. So we know what we want. We know that beautiful ideal that we'll have children who are self-confident, that who believe in the family, who are good Muslims, who are good people in the world. That's all very global and beautiful. What we might have more difficulty with is how do we make them just behave today? How do we make them, after 3 months of being inside of the house with them, how do we get them to be respectful and not use bad words and not spend too much time on their screens and not make their little brothers and sisters crazy, all of those kinds of things. And that we need to get more sort of hands-on methodology. We need to get recipes, right? So the first thing is to expect the possible, which means if we have unreasonable expectations about what a child should be doing at a certain age, we are not going to get the results that we want. So we want to know what is actually, and pull out those dusty old developmental psychology books. So what should 2-year-olds, and actually beautiful use of technology, what you can Google, what should 2-year-olds be doing? What should 3-year-olds be doing? Should they be quiet and nicely eating their food? No, that's not their job. They're still trying to figure out how I get this thing in my hand and how do I hold it? And, at 7 or 8, should they be, understanding and listening to you and saying, I'm so sorry, mom? No, that's not even normal. So we want them to have behaviors that are normed for their age and their developmental being. We also want to know and accept our particular child, because we did not always get the child that we either wanted or the child that we thought we were going to get, right? We probably got the child that's more like us than we necessarily wanted, or that's more like the part of our spouse that wasn't our favorite. So we want to be able to know our actual kid, and to know what they're good at, what their strengths are. How do we build on those strengths? What are the things they are not so good at? How do we build on them? But we need to know and accept. If we have a kid who's kind of timid, it's not going to be the kid tomorrow who's going to be, jumping off the diving board, for example, right? They're going to need a little bit more. We're going to talk about scaffolding a little bit further. So we want to know what our kid is, because we want to know what their strengths are. The other thing is we do want to know what those strengths are. So if we talk about who your kid is, who your child is, and all you can think, and then they do this, and then they're not good at this, then we have some trouble too. You have to dig deep and really figure out, so what is my child good at? What are those even if it's, parents will tell me my child is so manipulative. I'm like, wow, that means they can really read people. That means they're really good at managing situations. So we always want to find those skills within that child, whether or not we like those skills or not. And many times it's our skills that they picked up. We want a role model. Now, we want a role model as adults, but we also want everybody in the house to be role modeling. We want them around people that they can learn from. Okay, so we do want to monitor kind of who's around them and the behavior of those people. Now, you can't tell grandma she can't do something, right? We can't tell older brother. Neighbors are a little bit hard, but you do want to talk to your kids about the models that are around them. Like, wow, I really like the way that your friend shares, or, ooh, I really don't like the way that they talk to their parents, things like that. Again, not to say that that's a bad kid or that you're not allowed to play with that kid. You want to talk about behaviors as apart from the person. You want to break skills down to little tiny pieces that kids can understand, right? So one of the errors that we make as parents is like, go clean your room. Now, as a kid, depending on how much experience you have with that, you may not know what that means, right? So I shove everything under the bed, or I put it in the closet, so you kind of have to break it down and say, okay, so first of all, go put all of the toys in the toy place. Second of all, take all of the dirty clothes and put it in there. You have to give them an idea of what your expectation is, not only for the end point, but each of those steps, right? So what is play nice? Go play nice with your sister. Well, what does that mean? That means, pick a toy that you can share together, pick something where you can each be playing next to each other and not bother each other. Don't aggressively touch, don't take anything. You have to really build up the steps and explain what that really means, because a lot of times as adults we have an understanding of our desired end of what we're trying to tell kids to do, but really and truly a lot of times they don't understand. And you see this even with you will do your homework. Well, doing my homework could be as quick as possible, right? And sometimes what I'll do is do a timer and say, you can't finish your homework until this time is over, because I want you to take time. I want you to check your answers. I want you to do things like that. So just getting it done is not what I want. I want you to spend time thinking about it. Then my instructions are different. So you really need to break down those skills into little pieces that they can actually do depending on their age and development and maturity and those types of things. It's really important to have a team approach when we're looking at building positive behaviors. And that's true for us too, right? So we need to be able to say, oh, it's that tattling behavior again. Not you, you're the tattler, but oh, there we go. We're telling on people again. What do we need to do? So it's us together with the child against the bad behavior, not us against the child or the children against each other. So we wanted to give those behaviors a life and an outside being. Oh, there's the that sounds like a storytelling as opposed to lying. Lying's kind of that sounds like a story. I wonder, maybe we could talk about what happened that people could see and hear. So you want to again have a team approach. It's not you're the bad person, it's all of us against that. And sometimes we do that with mommy and daddy too, right? So if mommy and daddy maybe say bad words when they're driving, not anybody I would know. Oh, mommy, you said that bad word again. Oh no, what do I need to do? You need to say, two ayahs over again or whatever. You want to be able to make also a team approach, because as parents we're not perfect, and if we try to be perfect that's really exhausting and it's not helpful to our kids to come from a state of perfection and that you just must meet my state of perfection, right? It's better for them to, we're all a team against bad behaviors in our house. So if mommy's eating cookies before dinner, that, oh, mom, you're not supposed to be doing that. So that there's a feeling of camaraderie, not in a way that children are parentified, because there's a difference between parents and children. We want to be the parents, and we are not their friends. We are their parents, but that they can catch us. They can catch us kind of and help us also to curb our bad habits. Scaffolding really talks, what scaffolding is in a house, right? So as you go up in the house and you're working on it, you have these boards underneath you so you can stand and do the work that needs to be done. The same with kids. So a lot of times kids will need scaffolding to do the work that needs to be done. When we think about things like doing homework, for example, well, I can't do the homework because I forgot the book and I don't have a pencil and I didn't listen to the teacher. So maybe we need to put some steps in underneath them. Okay, so maybe we need a set of books at home, or we need to keep the books in the book bag and not put them in the locker or the desk. Or maybe we need to have a note system where well, luckily a lot of it's online, but the teacher will give us the things online. Because if we set the kid up for failure, if we say, okay, well, you're never going to do your homework because we're so far behind, we don't even have the book, we don't have the pencil, we don't have the instructions, then the kid is never gonna experience success. And kids who never experience success just give up and they say it's not worth it, right? So we have to help them out. Okay, so now we're going to put, in the morning if everything is crazy. So how do we make things better? Well, let's make sure that your lunch is made and that your book bag is here and that your clothes are here. Because otherwise, if I'm saying, well, you should be mature enough to do it yourself. Well, you should be independent to do it, but they're not at that moment. So we need to build in the steps so that they can have success. Now, successful, and you guys know this, right? So if somebody put you in a class of Chinese and told you, okay, write this essay, you wouldn't even try because you don't have any of the tools to get there, and you would be angry and frustrated and you would not want to try. That's how a lot of our kids feel frequently, because they're starting out from a place where either they're behind or they don't have the skills. And we're all saying to them, but you should know, but I don't know. So it's not helpful for you to tell me like, well, you should know Chinese, your second grandfather twice removed was from China, so you should, but I don't. So I need something underneath me. I need that scaffolding to move me to the place where I can begin to have success. And once I begin to have success, I'm more likely to try new things, to try harder, to try longer, and to have more future success. And then we talk about reward. Now, I know there's this idea, it's like, well, we shouldn't bribe kids to do what they should be doing anyway. So we don't bribe them to be good, and we don't bribe. Now, I get paid for the work that I do, and I'm guessing that you do too. And I don't consider that a bribe, right? I don't think, oh, they're bribing me to do my work. I love my work. I would do it anyway. I would. But the rewards are helpful. The same with kids. So we're not bribing them to do work. We're celebrating the fact that they actually are doing well, that they are having success, that we are, and that's something that's encouraging and wonderful. Now, what we do want to do is be careful about those rewards, because if it's, you get $1 for every A you get, and you're just a B student, you're just biologically and genetically a B student, then you're going to have some difficulty. So what we want to do, and then to be honest, kids are going to cheat, because the only thing that's important is that end point. So what we want to do is really reward effort, which is very different than almost anything that you see in the world these days, which is to say, I'm going to, you get a prize, or you get extra Xbox time or whatever for spending the time reading and studying, not for getting an A tomorrow, because there might be a lot of things that get in the way of you getting an A, but I can see the effort that you're putting in. And that's what's important to me. So we want to make sure that a lot of our efforts are not just about outcome, not about doing the beautiful thing, but the work that it takes to get there. Because we want kids that work hard. We don't want kids necessarily that will get an easy outcome and jump ahead without really having deep roots in knowledge or skills. Now, when a behavior needs change, so we do have a behavior that's not working for our kid, there's a process around how we do that. So one is that we want to isolate 1 to 3 behaviors. And really, if we're starting, we just want one. Because if we tell a child, well, you need to pay attention more, and you need to stop fighting with your sister, and you need to do, they're going to get overwhelmed, and they're going to just feel like they're bad, instead of that we're tackling one behavior. It's all those. And as you know, as adults, it's hard to go on a diet with food and your screen time and say that you're going to exercise more all at once. You want to break things down so you can do good at once. Almost all behavior, even bad behavior, is usually functional, means it works. Kids don't do things that don't work. Nobody does. Adults don't either, but especially kids don't do. So if I'm whining and you don't like whining, if you don't want me to do that, then you have to make it not work. Because usually what happens is, as parents, we say, if I'm on the telephone and you're bugging me for something, and I'm like, don't bug me when I'm on the telephone. Don't bug me when I'm on the telephone. But after 15 minutes, I take down the cookies and I give them to you because I want to talk on the telephone. Then I have just made that behavior work. And what I've just taught you as a kid is, no matter what I say with my mouth, if that behavior works, then it works. So we want to study what is the kid getting out of this behavior? Are they getting out of a behavior? Are they getting out of doing something they don't want to do? Are they getting something like attention, even bad attention, that they want? What function? Why is this behavior work? How does this behavior work? And we want to be kind of scientists about it. Not is the behavior good or bad or moral or not moral, but how does this behavior work in kind of a scientific kind of way? Then we want to figure out what's keeping that behavior in place. What reinforcement? What kind of special prize the kid is getting from that behavior, even though we think that they're not getting anything out of it, right? And sometimes just excitement, right? So especially during virus time when we were all stuck inside, we heard kids, saying bad words, and then everybody gets excited and yells, and you're like, as a kid, that's like a three-ring circus, right? All this fun stuff is happening. I don't have to do remote school anymore. Everybody's upset, those kinds of things. So we want to see what the reinforcements are in getting this thing done. We also want to see what are the obstacles. So what gets in the way of the kid really trying to do good, and just not being able to. So I did my homework and then I forgot to turn it in, or I'm trying to be nice to my sister, but my little sister really gets also reinforcement from making me scream, because then everybody comes running. So we want to find like what works about this behavior and what gets in the way of the kid doing another behavior. Then we want to talk about how do we get the kid to get what they need, the same result, without doing a bad behavior. So if when I'm doing my homework and I don't understand something and I feel overwhelmed, I cry and I scream and I scrunch it up and I throw it away, what does that behavior get me? Usually that mom will come and everybody will yell and I get out of the homework, to be honest, or I get help. So is there a way that we can say, instead of all of that, we say, Mom, can I have some help? And mom promises to give me 5 minutes of help if I ask in a good way, instead of scrunching up my paper and throwing it away. So we want to determine a way to get the kid the thing they need, without doing that bad behavior. We want to make a plan for cessation, to get rid of that bad behavior. A lot of that is ignoring, and we're so bad at this as parents. We want to ignore, but there are some things that make us crazy, right? So really, cessation, the best way to get rid of a bad behavior, if it's something you can ignore, is to ignore it, because then it doesn't get the kid what they want, and they don't get the added benefit of attention and excitement from your yelling or reacting in some way to the behavior. So one is that we want to make a plan for cessation of the behavior. So that means we either ignore it, we reward positive, we reward the opposite, we give consequences, and we're going to talk about consequences in a little bit, about what they have to be like. But we need a plan, and we need to tell the kid a plan. There's no such thing as reverse psychology and secret psychology and all those things. Kids work best when we tell them, okay, so we're all against the, scrunching up the paper and throwing it away when we do homework. So what are some of our options going to be? What's our plan going to be? We're going to see what's going to work, and we're going to document it, because kids are smart these days, and they want to see they want to be data-based, right? They want to see the result. Okay, so this is how many times you did it. This is when you did the good stuff. That's what you got for it. That's the one time you threw the paper away. That's what happened. So it helps them to understand the world, right? It's to make the world less mysterious. And then we want to evaluate. So did it work? Did our plan work? Did the behavior go away? Did it not go away? Did we get lazy? What worked and what didn't work? And then we start over again with a new behavior, or with the same behavior in a different plan if the plan didn't work. Now, when we make these behavioral goals, we need to be really specific, because like I said, it can't be just be good. I want you to just be good. That's all I want. I want you to tell the truth. Just tell the truth all the time, right? So we want to have actions that are really clearly tied to the behavior. So if it's frustration, the scrunching up the paper. If it's bad words, we want to be really clear about what the behavior is that we're trying to eliminate, that we're trying to get rid of. We want it to be something the kid can actually do, right? So we want it to be something like, I want you never to tell a lie again. Well, that's probably not going to happen. I want you to, be honest about your homework. That might be a little bit different. It has to be something that can be measured. Did it happen or didn't? I don't like your attitude. Well, attitude is really hard to measure, right? I can't change an attitude. And even that's fine. If you just follow my rules and you don't like it, that's okay. I follow a lot of rules in the world I don't like either. I'm not trying to control your thoughts or your opinions. I'm just trying to do a behavior that can be measured. And then that can be documented, because we don't want to get into this kind of back and forth with kids. I did it, I didn't do it, I did it, I didn't do it. If we have behavior goals that are good, we know whether you did it or not. I did, the 5 pages of homework are in front of us. The folded laundry is in front of us. The the smiling sister because you didn't hit her in front of, and we know that if you hit her, what that looks like. There's no question about that. So we want things that are clear, just like we want in our world of leaders. We want things that can be achieved, that can be measured, and can be documented. That's also what we want in behavior plans with kids. Now, for consequences, there are some rules, because it's not like, well, we'll go to Disney World someday, right? Those kinds of things are not helpful. We want rewards that are timely, which means depending on the age of the kid, you want them to have it within the next 5 minutes, hour, end of the day. And it's not really till they hit 11 or 12 that you can have a reward that's going to come at the end of the week. It's got to be something immediate. Now, whether it's a sticker or a check mark, and then you count them up and you get a special treat at the end of the week, maybe. But they need to see something real. They need to see, especially younger guys, they don't have the capacity. They don't have that object permanence that's going to last a long time to know that something good is going to happen. So for little guys, they need to see something, or they need to get something right away. It has to be individual to the child, right? So you can't give the child, well, I'm going to give you M&Ms and the kid likes peanuts, right? So it has to be something that is individual to the child, that the child really likes and is motivating to that child. Now, for some kids, being left alone is a motivator, right? So we'll say, okay, if you do all this homework, nobody will talk to you for 5 minutes or 10 minutes, or we won't bother you to do anything else for the rest of the day, but we have to do these things first. So you have to find what works for that particular kid. It can't be something that you get satiated by. So chocolate food is always a bad one, unless it's like a dessert at the end of the night, because you can only eat so many M&Ms, right? So if I'm getting an M&M for every page of homework I'm done, I'm going to get tired of M&Ms really quickly. Or if I'm going to get, $1 for every page of homework I do, okay, so maybe some of us would not get satiated with money, but kids don't necessarily see that tie. So it can't be something that you get tired of. It has to be a closed system, which means if we're doing, you're getting a movie night at the end of the week, if you do your homework all week long, but then my cousins come over on Wednesday and we can see movies whenever we want, then it's not going to work. It has to be a closed system. Like, the only way you get this prize is by doing the other things that you're doing. There has to be a reasonable rate. Now, again, this depends a lot on age. So if I want you to put away your toys, I don't give you a sticker every single toy you put away if there are 15 toys on the floor, because again, that's silly. We'll put it, when you're done cleaning up your whole room. Or if I want you to study more, I can't, every minute that you study, you're not going to get a prize. It's going to be at the end of the day or the end of the week, again, depending on your age. We want things that have some permanent value, which means we can't take them away. We can't, well, that just is, you're going to lose that now, because then kids will not work for it. If they know that it's like a carrot in front of them that you put over and take away, then they'll stop working for it. Kids are very smart, and they're not going to work for consequences that never come. So you really need to be honest and integritous about what that looks like. Now, when it comes to behavior plans, to be honest, it's not the kid that needs to change. It's almost always us. Kids are very logical. They're very scientific. They do what we reinforce, and they stop doing what does not work for them. So as parents, we're the ones who need to start with a doable plan, which means if we're in the middle of moving, or we're staying with relatives, or it's the middle of Ramadan, maybe it's not the best time to start a behavior plan. We need a plan that really we can do. We need to have time and energy to really dedicate to maybe some uncomfortable interactions and being on top of things and making the little checkpoints and all of those things. We need to make a plan that's going to make sense for our family at this time. We also can't make threats that we don't keep. Now, again, I raised my child for 6 years in Nablus in Palestine. And I love my people, but they are very good at threat. I will take your eyes out. I will do this. You will never go anywhere again. And none of the kids know none of that is happening. So they don't listen to it. It's not effective. So you really don't make threats that you don't want to keep. Now, I will tell you, we had a funny story where I told one of my sons, we were in the grocery store and he was asking always for a lot of things. And I said, if you ask for one more thing, We are going to walk back to the house. We are not going to take a taxi. We're not going to, because we do, taxis are very common in the place where we lived in Palestine. And he asked for one more thing. And I was like, oh no, because not only he has to walk, I have to walk. And because I'm a parent trainer, everyone in the community has their eye on me. So I knew I couldn't back down. So we had to walk home that day with bags full of groceries, and it wasn't fun. And then I became very careful about what I threatened, because you can't say something unless you're really willing to do it, because otherwise your words become really non-effective in changing the behavior of your kids. Don't be emotional, because again, if you're like, and I told you I need you to, that's not the way kids learn, because they're going to be able to manipulate you a little bit if they know that if you're feeling some kind of way about it. And because if you then lose your temper or lose your cool, then you're not effective in terms of teaching. So you have to be robo parent, right? It has to be, oops, you didn't finish your homework, so now you're not going to get TV time. I'm really sorry. Maybe we'll do better tomorrow, right? Not yelling, not because really it doesn't bother you. It's going to bother them. They're not the one watching TV. It shouldn't bother you, right? There are bad things that happen when you don't follow the rules, and that just is what it is. So we know that children listen better to consequences that are just non-emotional. You have to be consistent. What I tell parents is, you cannot make a rule that you will not follow the day you win the lottery, or that get the best present ever, or the day that you've had the worst day ever. Because children will then learn that what they're following is your mood and not really the rule. And a lot of us have this difficulty, right? So if I'm in a good mood, it's okay. You can have ice cream before dinner or whatever. But if I'm in a bad mood, we have strict rules. Kids are so smart. Kids are little baby psychologists. So they know how rules work in your house. So the rules have to be consistent on good days, on bad days. It's just the rule. We have to ignore normal but annoying behavior. Which is to say, we can use up all of our parent time and energy, like, don't giggle, don't jump up and down, don't do this, don't do that. And to be honest, those are pretty normal behaviors. They're annoying. And sometimes, maybe we need a timeout when the kids are giggling or whatever, but they're pretty normal behaviors. And we don't want to use all of our parental energy on things that really are not game changers. We really want to focus on the things that are going to help our child succeed, or that are going to get in the way of succeeding. And then the last one is, give yourself a timeout when you need one. Sometimes we as parents, we are not reacting. To be honest, we're not reacting to what our kids are doing. We're reacting to whatever the bad day we had at work, the unpleasant words we had with our spouse, something else. So if we need a timeout and we need not to be a parent for a minute, we need to give ourselves that, instead of kind of trying to justify our bad mood and making up something that, that somehow it's the kid's fault, when it's just us that needs a break. Now, I do have the haram factor, because, as I said, I did raise my children in a society that was, no matter what I did, no matter what my consequences were, some grandmother or some auntie would be like, "I haram, give him the cookie. Look at his face. He's so sad. How could you do this to him?" Right? And they were not always supportive of my behavior change plans in the community and in the family. So I do think we have to be really committed, and it's not easy to say children should have logical consequences for behavior that we don't approve of, that is our job as parents, that children will and should feel bad when there's a negative outcome to their behavior. So when they lose the computer, or they're not allowed to watch the TV, or they don't get the cookie after dinner, or you make them walk home from the grocery store, they're not supposed to like it. And that's okay. It's okay for our children not to like things. That's the whole idea, right? If they don't like it, hopefully they won't do it again. So you have to, though, be strong enough as a parent to say, yeah, I know you're sad and I see you crying and I'm really sorry about that. As long as, again, your punishment is not excessive and is not painful to them, is not something that's causing them problem, it's okay. And it's okay for them to feel unhappy about it. And you have to avoid listening to the grandmas and the aunties who, by the way, are terrible disciplinarians who will whack you over the head, but then will look at the child and say, "I had why are you doing to this poor child?" Right? So you need to take those guys and be like, "I'm trying to be a responsible parent," and you close your ears and try not to do that in front of them, because then the kid learns very quickly that they have somebody on their side who's going to get them out of punishments easily. I think that the way that you do that is to remind yourself that children who do not know how to manage their behavior really are in danger when they go into a different community, right? So if they go to school and they do things and they're not aware of how to manage their behavior, how to stop bad behaviors, if they're in the street, we need children, not only Muslim children, but we need our children to be safe. And part of making them safe is teaching them how to manage their own behaviors, and to manage their bad behaviors. So it's not that we do this for fun, or we like taking away the screen time or the TV time or the dessert, but that really, as parents, that is our responsibility. Now, when we talk about siblings, because that is one of the places where people have the most problem with kids, I tell this story, right? And I want you to imagine that, mostly women here, right? So I want you to imagine that your husband comes home and says, "You are a great wife. I love you so much. You are so smart. You're amazing. You're everything I wanted in a wife. But you've been my wife for like 2 years, and it's time to bring in a new wife." And how that would feel, right? No matter what our religious beliefs about the right of a man to do that, how that would feel as you. Um, and know that that's kind of how kids feel if they're old enough to process those feelings when we bring home a sibling. Now, that's not to say that we don't have the right to do that or it's not a good thing to do, but they're going to feel some kind of way about it, right? So siblings, by definition, are really their primary competition for parental resources, and that's attention and affection and stuff. And that's why sometimes those relationships are contentious. They feel like that kids really are competing all the time. Now, as as we are demanded upon when we take up another wife, that they are treated equally and that they get the same amount of resources, we have to do the same to kids, which means in some homes, if there is not enough time, energy, goodwill, affection for the kids, then you are going to get very sort of conflictual sibling relationships, because they're fighting over something that there's not enough for one or two of them, and then maybe there's three or four or five of them. And again, I'm not talking about material stuff, because it's really not about that, but it's about parental patience and time and energy and all of those kinds of things. Sometimes siblings are put in the position of being untrained and unwilling authority figures, right? So you're the oldest, even though you may only be 5 and you're supposed to be sort of taking care of the people underneath you. And you're just really at 5 or 7 or even 8, not able, you don't have the ability to be a leader, or to be an authoritative, or to be a caretaker even at that point. So you want children, and because of that, you do it in a bad way. Well, I'm going to get in trouble if you spill the cookies, so I'm going to yell at you, I'm going to hit you, I'm going to do whatever to make sure you don't spill the cookies, because in the end of the day, I'm going to get hit for it, or I'm going to get in trouble for it because I'm the biggest. So we don't want to put kids in the position where we're asking them to take leadership positions that they're really not able to. And sibling conflict is almost always a product of pressured competition for parental reinforcement. Who does mommy like? Who does daddy like? Who do they give praise to? It's really important for kids. You have to remember that they don't have bosses. They don't have other people in the world telling them whether they're good, bad, or they're making the grade or not. All they have, especially when they're smaller, is their parents. So that parental reward, that parental reinforcement, is really important to them, and it has to be generously given to everyone, or you get that competition. Now, the competition is not natural. It doesn't happen on its own. It really comes from parental behavior and kids noting who gets more of that, when they get more of that, what you do to get more of that. And it's very, very important to them. So it is something that they pay attention to. So when we have problems between siblings, we really need to look at what we're doing as parents. So I gave some examples of, and I know we don't have, I want to cut off a little bit so we can do questions if we need to. I did give some examples of some of the bad behaviors. We see what the function of them might be and what are some remedies. So bad words. Bad words may be a need for attention, because there's no quicker way to get attention than to say a very bad word, whatever that is in your house. And we have different levels of what's a bad word and what's not. Sometimes it's a need for excitement. Things are really slow and boring, and that really will light things up in the house. Sometimes it's a bad habit we've learned from adults, where it's just the thing that comes out of our mouth, especially for the younger guys. And sometimes, sadly, it's even a way to distract adults from maybe mom and dad are fighting, or grandma is yelling at mom, and we need a way to break that up and put the attention on us and move it away from the conflict of the family. So some of the remedies are verbal alternatives, right? We put in other words that maybe sound like those words but are not as bad. Positive attention for small good behaviors. Let's just give them a lot of, wow, you did a great job, that's a great look, to keep them kind of busy and distracted. Stimulation, make sure that they have enough activities during the day so that they're not getting frustrated or needing to create excitement out of nowhere. Refusal, and that's like refusal to do chores, refusals to go to school, refusal. And again, it's different depending on the kid and the environment. A lot of time it's fear of failure or little or no tolerance for frustration. And again, this unfortunately sometimes comes from us, especially if we had very restrictive parents or very parents who made us do a lot of work. We think that, well, we need to make life easier for our kids. There's a beautiful story about parenting that comes from an Asian sensei who was walking in the gardens and saw a butterfly struggling to get out of a cocoon, and struggling. And what they did is they cut the cocoon, and what happened immediately is that the butterfly fell to the ground and died, because one of the things about butterflies, which is an actual biological fact, is the struggle to get out of the cocoon makes their wings strong enough to fly. And if they don't struggle, they can't fly. And the same is true with our children. If we make everything easier for them, if we cut up their food and we do the homework for them, and they never have to do anything that takes patience, or we make them feel like, well, if you fail, it's the end of the world, instead of, wow, that didn't work, let's try the next thing, then they become very fearful, or they are very intolerant of frustration. So one of the things that we need to do is, of course, make them small, doable steps, but that they actually do the steps, not that we do it for them. Social modeling, like, oops, I made a mistake. What do I need to do now? Oops, I need to start this over again. To have another child their age, kind of show them, oh, this is the way that I do it. And then timed trials. Well, let's sit down and concentrate on it for this amount of time. And let me see if I can help you, but really just putting that scaffolding, not do the work for them. Our children, and we're going to talk about this at the end, really need the skills of tolerance. They really need to be able to manage frustration and to keep working. One of the things I'll do is we'll talk about traffic, right? And traffic is really annoying to everyone. And I always say, well, there's no traffic going to the dentist, right? No lines, no waiting. We can get in there quickly. If we're in traffic, it usually means we're going somewhere fun or we're going somewhere exciting. And if we're waiting in line, it usually means that it's for something positive, because we don't get lines, to go get vaccines or things like that. So we want kids to know that waiting and the ability to withstand frustration a little bit usually leads to a really positive end. Hiding and lying. These are one of the things that happen that parents really get nervous about because we think, oh my gosh, my child is going to be a monster. They're not going to be a good person. They're not going to be a good spouse. Instead of saying, so where does that really come from? So kids who are either lying or sneaking or hiding, it usually comes from a place where they don't feel safe to make mistakes. Or they're trying to avoid excessive punishment, right? Or they're being asked to control like a natural tendency. One of the things I've seen parents do is say, I'm at work, I'm not there to control you, but you shouldn't turn on the TV or the video games. You should do your homework first. Well, for a kid, that's like having like, a baggie of cocaine there and saying, okay, but don't touch it, right? So sometimes we're asking them to do things that they can't possibly do, but they want to keep us happy. So they can't tell the truth, like I can't do it. So one is that we need to give situations that are possible for them to be successful in, and we have to also talk about, okay, well, we all make mistakes, so how do we manage when we make mistakes that's not excessive, that's not humiliating to the person. Now, there are some kids who have biogenetic behavioral disorders that make certain behaviors, reactions, and feelings hard to avoid. And for those guys, we don't enter into simple behavior change kinds of patterns because it sets them up for failure. For those guys, we may need biopsychosocial evaluations from a mental health professional and actual treatment with professional assistance. That treatment may or may not include medication. So it isn't saying, oh, well, they need medication or they need an operation or they need something. A lot of times it's behavioral, but you really need that professional perspective to be able to make it a plan that's really going to work for a child with a very specific sensitivity. So we talk about things like autism spectrum disorder, which is a biogenetic disorder which affects communication, socialization, and behavior, where we get kids who may be nonverbal or may be verbal in a very ritualistic way, so they don't use language in the same way that other kids do. They may have other kinds of ritualistic behaviors, spinning, things with their hands, preferred items that they don't go anywhere with. Now, that's not like a child who only has like a special blanket or a special bunny that they like, but this is really like a lot of their behavior is ritualized, and those guys may need a special kind of behavior plan to be able to get to the point where they can communicate, where they can understand people's feelings, those kinds of things. Attention deficit disorder, which can come with or without hyperactivity, which is also a biogenetic disorder which affects the ability to focus and concentrate. Intellectual deficits, which are particular syndromes, which are usually genetic, but can also come from toxins and other kinds of things, which affect the child's ability to think and to sometimes grow in a way that is in coordinates with their actual physical age and maturity level. Post-traumatic stress disorder, which are reactions after a life-altering event, which have children re-experiencing, having a lot of avoidance because they don't want to think about that particular memory. And then what we talked about previously, central nervous system activation, where they get a lot of physiological symptoms that are hard to manage. Depression, which is also a biogenetic disorder, which is exacerbated by stress and results in sadness, irritability, easily giving up, fatigue, those kinds of things. And then anxiety, which is, again, a biogenetic disorder, including phobias, generalized anxiety, obsessive compulsive disorder, separation anxiety, and those kinds of things. And that's not to say that we treat those children extraordinarily differently, but it may mean that if we give them a regular behavior plan the way that we do another child, it might be possible for them to succeed at, which is why it's helpful for us, at least in the beginning, as we're learning about that child and their specific needs, that we get professional help to be able to give us plans that will work well with that child. And so that, as parents, despite the fact that we had children, we are not always the only or the best person to be able to work with those children. So we can go to parents. Brothers and sisters might be the person who's best to model or to affect change with a child. Other family members, a favorite auntie, a favorite uncle, grandparents, school personnel, parenting programs, mental health professionals. All the beautiful thing is that we have all of those things at our fingertips, and we need to use them all. The idea with fairness for children is that we don't treat children exactly the same. So if we have one child with a reading who has difficulty with reading, we get them that help. The same way that if we had a child with a broken leg, we would get them crutches, right? We wouldn't say, oh, it's not fair to the other kids, they're not on crutches. We get the kids the help that they need, or the encouragement that they need, depending on their specific needs. Our goal always is nurturing and guiding a new generation of Muslims, of people to go out and to do good and to be our representatives in the world. Now, I am missing 3 slides, but I want to talk about 3 specific goals for Muslim families and in creating strong Muslims. One is gratitude. So we know that it is a very important skill for us to be able to look at the world and to be thankful for the things that we have. Both to Allah, to our creator, and to the people around us. People who do not have that skill, a lot of times have psychological and behavioral, a lack of skills to be able to manage the world. So that becomes really important. One of the things, one of the little tricks that I did with my kids, who then made it, of course, because I have 6 boys, they made it a game. They made it a competitive game. Is something we just called Alhamdulillah, which is to say, at the end of the night, let's find as many things as that we can that we're grateful for today. And I did it with them when they were very, very young. And then actually during the shelter in place restrictions, where things began to feel like, we started using it again, even though they're teenagers. And of course, they're very competitive about it. I got 35, I got 37, but the idea, so, like, Alhamdulillah, the sun is shining. Alhamdulillah, we had like a good breakfast. Alhamdulillah, the car is working. Alhamdulillah, like any small thing that you can think about, because it really does raise the consciousness and focus on what we have as opposed to what we don't have, or what we can do as opposed to what we can't do. So gratitude is one of the skills that's very, very important for our faith, but is also really important in terms of having children who are successful and strong in the world. A second one, and we talked about it a little bit, is tolerance. And that is tolerance at the small level, and then tolerance at the bigger level. Tolerance at the small level means the ability to withstand frustration, the ability to say some things are hard. Now, I was not even in the olden days. I remember spending time at home picking olives, or doing pecans, and opening, and just learning that to get what I really wanted, I had to work. I had to do a lot of little things that were boring, that were not so much exciting, that really got me to the bigger thing that I wanted. A lot of times with the world that we live in, our kids are not forced to do that. In fact, I have a son in high school, and I was sort of horrified. I'm a professor. I was horrified. He was writing a paper, and he was telling Siri, move that paragraph to there, and I was like, that's not writing a paper. You have to you even type it, but you can't tell Siri to do stuff for you. That's wrong. It seems so wrong to me. So a lot of times our kids are not getting those skills in other places, and the idea that things should be quick and they should be easy. And for us to give them situations, things are not quick and easy. Things take work, things take time, things take patience. Now that's for the small thing. For the big thing, we also know, and we hear these verses all the time, right? With every calamity, with every stress comes relief. You will not be burdened beyond what you can bear. And those things are beautiful, but what they tell me is that calamity and stress and burdens are part of what we can expect of lives in our lives as Muslims. And if we do not teach our children that that is part of their life and to be expected, so a pandemic, maybe not, but frustration in our lives, absolutely yes. These are things that will happen. And then how do we manage them? How do we work around them? How do we be patient and faithful through them is part of our job as Muslim parents in raising good Muslims. And then the last, really, as we have been living in the world that we live in, is the idea that Muslims are also advocates for justice, that we stick up for ourselves and we also stick up for victims of injustice, and what that looks like and what conversations we have about that in our homes and in our masjids and in our teaching situations with young people, and really saying this is not apart from us. So our life in the dunya is not to just sit on top of people and go, oh, look, so sad for those people. Our job, we were put in this world as Muslims to get our hands dirty and to make things better and to earn our way into Jannah doing those kinds of things. So we need to know who we are as Muslims and to make those statements, and to work with our kids on how to be advocates, not only for themselves, but for anybody who is a victim of injustice. So all of those things are also important within our parental teachings as Muslims as well. So I did get done in time for some questions if we have them. If not, know that if you have any questions or concerns that you're not able to address at this moment or don't feel comfortable addressing at this moment, absolutely, you can go through Peaceful Family Program, Peaceful Family Project, and send information, and that can get to me or another professional within our community. I would also, of course, say thank you, and know that anything good that you got was from our creator and from our teachers. Anything that was a mistake was absolutely from me. So thank you, and salam.
Alaikum, Sister Birthday. Thank you so much for that amazing presentation. We have one question from someone on Facebook, and they're asking if you can speak on social media usage with kids and what are healthy boundaries to set, especially with teens where it seems impractical to keep them away from social media apps.
Absolutely. And I can talk to this. My children hate the fact that I actually have done a bunch of research. Palestine is actually, for a lot of reasons, one of the places that has the highest level of social media addiction within our young people than anywhere. And I have like an entire set of articles on this. So one thing that you need to remember, and right now we have our hands thrown up in the air because with remote learning and with quarantine and not wanting kids to be out, it's a complicated situation. So what I can tell you from a medical point of view, and according to the American Pediatric Association, when we look at ages of screen time, children should not, and parents are going to hate me, and children should not have any screen time until the age of 5. And I know almost all of them do, right? Because they get our phones. I have 2-year-olds who are like, we're doing that. But really and truly, developmentally speaking, social, not only social media, but screen times in general, set up a very odd biological reality within the brains of our children. So they are setting off endorphins that are very similar to like drug use. There's nothing in the real world that is as stimulating as either social media or video games. It just is at a rate that is not normal in the outside world. So what happens is it's very addictive. Like, I'm not kidding, it is absolutely like cocaine. And it's really, really hard for kids to manage that on their own, even as teenagers. They really can't. It's not possible. Like I said, it'd be like somebody putting down like a box of chocolate donuts or a bag of cocaine next to you. It's very, very hard to manage it. So under the age of 5, there should be no screen time because we don't want kids to lose their developmental task that they're doing. Other than that, now again, we all had to flip this upside down during shelter in place, even internationally, because then kids were getting all of their learning, remote learning, and they were also getting all of their socialization time with peers via screen. So that's understandable. What we're doing now is, so how do we get normal sleep cycles? So I know, especially with teenagers, we have a lot of difficulty with late night usage. And to be honest, they can't do it on their own. So this is one of those times where you just have to be a parent. And I do not do what people know. I do not do what I do not I don't say what I don't do myself. So I have a 15-year-old, and at a certain time of night, we take away all of those electronics because there's no way he can do it on his own. He just can't. It's not possible. So we take the computer and the phone and the switch and all of the things that we need to do. And there's almost no other way to manage that. Unfortunately, especially if the regular socialization and the regular activity is really limited because kids are in stay-at-home quarantines and things like that. So one is to set the limits, talk about it, and then actually not allow them to go over that because they really can't help it. What we know that with screen time, general screen time, is that it increases depression, it increases anxiety, and they do lose, and this is scientific again, not just because I'm a mom and I want to say that, they really do lose the desire to go out and do other things. Now, with social media in particular, with teens, we have to be really, really careful because of the idea of self-image. So one is that to teach them to be good consumers, smart consumers of social media, which is to say what's real, what isn't real, what's presentation, what do you want your presentation to be, what do you want that to be. As parents, we have to be in there because children, again, especially teenagers, are not aware of how long lasting what the half-life of a post is, right? We do know that jobs and internships and universities are looking at people's profiles, and they are making judgments. We're all in the, oh, it's all good, no judgment. No, there are judgments being made. So you need to be able to talk to your child about, this is not something you do with your friends. This is a public forum that adults are watching, that people who have they have power over your future, and you really help them and guide them and teach them about what are the things that you want to present at any age. I have a son who was getting into law school, and we went through his profile, and there was stuff we had to take off because I had to help him to see through adult eyes or through very judgmental law school eyes what that would look like what that would look like to somebody who didn't know you and didn't know you, this was just a poem, or didn't know that this was just whatever. So it takes a lot of time and energy and vigiling what young people are doing. And I know that feels like, and I'm a human rights, my kids will always bring up the human rights issue. You're taking away my human rights for whatever. And you know what? I'm willing to kind of do that at this point. It's uncomfortable as a parent, and I think it's the one area where we have to be more aware than our parents had to be about who we were talking on the phone to and things like that, just because the options were so much smaller. The options now are so big, and it starts so early. Kids playing games and hearing, language that's coming from other people's houses. So as much as kids are not going to enjoy that, you're educating all the time, and then you're diluting their experience with it as much as you can, just because, again, there's a biophysiological piece that is just very, very addictive, and they can't manage on their own, and you have to kind of manage for them as much as you can to the point that they can. If you take it away, the other thing is you have to teach them to use it responsibly. You can't take, we know, right? The past 3 months, we can't take computers away. We can't take everything away because their school, their friends, that's the only way that they're getting normalized social interaction, as normal as it is. So we have to kind of find a very fine balance. And now that summer came, and we're not in remote school anymore, but we may still need it for socialization, is really having very stringent conversations and knowing in your own head what's going to be acceptable and what's not. The other thing is, as parents, we have to also model good behavior. So if we're all at dinner doing this, or we're on our computer all the time, then we can't expect our kids to manage better than we're able to manage as adults.
Thank you so much, Sister Denise. We have one more question from the Facebook chat asking, how do you get your children on board when a special needs child in the family is having a traumatic episode?
Yeah, this is not easy. So one is, it's never about one moment, right? So if we have a sibling group where one is a kid who has special needs and gets differential kinds of attention, um, we have to build in a safe place for the other kids, because we know that that one kid by definition is going to need more time and energy than maybe their siblings. So the idea is, how do they get that resources from mom or dad, right? So does everybody in the house have a date with mom or dad during another time? Do they have their own interests? You know, they're an artist, or they're in dance classes, or they're in something else, so that they have a full perspective. Now, a kid who's full can be generous, right? A kid who has all of their needs met will be able to look at a special needs sibling and go, oh, they need mom or dad right now, or they need whatever. When kids get when their needs are not met, and when they're always asked to sort of take a back step to the needs of another child in the family, that's when resentment is going to grow. So one is to balance it out, and to make sure that their needs are as important. Now, sometimes mom and dad can't do that. Sometimes mom and dad are just too overwhelmed. So we need a halto, right? We need an auntie, or we need an uncle, or we need somebody else to sort of be the special person for that kid, so that that kid, it doesn't have to be mom or dad, you know, really and truly it takes a village. So we want kids to have adults around them that can support them. If they have, you know, if mom and dad have a kid who's in the hospital a lot, or who's needing behavioral kinds of treatments, or all kinds of things. So one is that make sure that kid gets what they need. The second thing is really to educate kids and to talk about it. So kids are not stupid. They are aware of everything that's going on. And if we try to like, oh no, it's okay, or no, they're fine. We talk about these things all the time. So this is autism. That's what happens with kids with autism. This is, you know, attention deficit. This is, you know, we talk about it in a, not in a negative way, but in an educative way, right? So this is what we look at it, that's what that is, so that they're aware and they know what the rules and regulations are, and that becomes another way that they can become good advocates for that sibling. The I think the third piece, which sometimes is hard depending on what disability we're talking about, what diagnosis we're talking about, is to build sibling affection, build sibling relationships, which is not always easy, depending, you know, if we're talking about a child with autism spectrum disorder, where they're really bad at, it's part of their, you know, their neurological makeup. They're not so good at attaching with people, right? So then how do we build that? And so we make, you know, well, this sibling be the cookie and milk sibling. So that's the person we always, you know, that child goes to for cookies and milk. So that begins to build a positive bond. Or this is the person that always brushes my hair. And it does, one, is that gives mom and dad a break, but the other thing is that it really builds positive relationships with siblings with a little bit more thought, where you have to put a little bit more energy into it, because it doesn't happen as naturally.
Thank you. And we have one last question that I see here, which is referring back to the social media question and the use of apps for younger children. They're asking about how educational apps, if educational apps are okay for kids ages 2 and younger.
I would be very careful, to be honest, because what kids 2 and under need to learn is in their hands, right? It's not here. They're not, that's not where they are. So if we're trying to get them to learn language and colors, they're not there yet. Although we like that, and I know there's this family competition, and so kids under the age of 2 are really learning things with their hands. They're learning how to put things together. They're learning smell and taste and all of those kinds of things. There's nothing that a screen can teach a 2 and under. 2 to 5s, it's not the preferable means of learning. And I know that there's a ton of educational software out there and apps targeted at parents, not at the kids, because kids don't do that, buy those things for themselves. And it does keep them busy, but it's with the price of, again, sort of neural stimulation that's not totally appropriate for their age. The other thing is that we do know that attention span, which is already short in kids from 2 to 5, gets shorter because, again, nothing moves that quickly in the real world. And we want kids who are good in the real world. We want them, they'll get good at technology. No need to worry about that. But we want them to be good at things like, slicing and picking and skipping and running and catching and all sorts of things that just you're not going to get in an app.
Thank you so much, Dr. Denise, once again. It's been a pleasure having you. Just for everyone to know, we have our website in the chat, and I will resend it right now for anyone to access. And you can also send more questions via email that way. And this live stream will also be posted on our Facebook, which is Peaceful Families Project. Thank you so much.
Thank you all. Masalam, and go with peace.